It's funny how a picture can lie to you. I used to look at my wedding photos and see happiness. Now, I see a fool who didn't know what was coming. I sat at my desk, turning the frame over in my hands, running my thumb along the edge like I was trying to feel out the moment everything shifted. Maybe it was years ago, maybe it was yesterday. Hard to tell. Name's Felix Franklin. 52. Private investigator, though that sounds fancier than it is. I don't do high-profile cases, no million-dollar frauds or corporate espionage. Just the kind of jobs that help folks who got nowhere else to turn. Cheating spouses, missing persons, the occasional scumbag needing a reality check. Grew up bouncing through foster homes. Learned early that no one's coming to save you. You fend for yourself or you get chewed up. That mindset never left. It was late, the city humming outside my window, the smell of rain coming in through the half-cracked blinds. My office was the kind of place that smelled like old coffee and cheap cigarettes, even though I quit smoking years ago. The desk was cluttered, a mix of open case files, a half-eaten sandwich from a diner down the street, and my old .38 tucked under some papers. Habit, not paranoia. I leaned back in my chair, stared at the receipt in my other hand. 2 glasses of wine, an overpriced dinner, and a hotel charge at the Bellevue. One of those places with marble floors and bellhops that won't make eye contact unless you're tipping. I wasn't there, but Cassandra was. I wasn't a fool. I'd seen the signs. The way she turned her phone screen away when I walked by. The sudden interest in dressing up for lunch with a friend. That dreamy look she used to give me, now reserved for someone else. I'd spent my career catching liars. Hell, I was one myself when the job called for it. And Cassandra? She wasn't good at lying. I grabbed my coat, shoved the receipt into my pocket, and headed out. Rain had started falling, steady but light, misting the pavement and making everything shine under the streetlights. My car, a '98 Chevy Caprice, more rust than paint, sat waiting. I got in, started the engine, and drove. Didn't have to guess where she'd be. The Bellevue was 15 minutes away, sitting pretty on the north side of town. High-end crowd, men in tailored suits, women with tight smiles and diamonds they didn't buy themselves. I parked across the street, angled enough to get a clear view of the front doors. It didn't take long. Cassandra stepped out, her hair perfect even in the damp air, her hand brushing against the arm of the man next to her. Tall, good suit, polished in that way that screamed old money. I knew the type. He wasn't just some fling. He was a man who collected people like trophies. I snapped a few pictures. Not for me. I didn't need proof. I just liked knowing I had it. They stood there talking, her smile soft, like she was a kid remembering a song from years ago. He said something, and she laughed. Really laughed, the kind I hadn't heard from her in years. My grip tightened on the camera. Not from heartbreak. From knowing what came next. I wasn't going to lose my temper. I wasn't going to confront her in some big dramatic scene. That wasn't me. This was business. I'd build a life on knowing how to dismantle people without them seeing it coming. And Cassandra and her lover? They were about to learn that the hard way. I started the car, rolled out slow, disappearing into the night. I didn't go straight home. Didn't need to sit in that house, staring at the walls, knowing she'd come back smelling like another man's cologne. Instead, I drove to Marty's spot. The man practically lived in his cab, parked near Benny's diner when he wasn't picking up drunks or businessmen who thought they were philosophers after 3 scotches. When I pulled up, he was leaning against the hood, a cigarette dangling from his lips, watching the rain hit the pavement like he was waiting for it to spell out an answer. He glanced at me, then at my face, and let out a low whistle. Damn, Franklin. You look like someone just told you the Bears had a shot this season. I killed the engine, stepped out, and yanked the cigarette from his fingers, taking a drag. I didn't smoke anymore, but old habits had a way of creeping back when the world kicked you in the teeth. Marty didn't argue. He just pulled another from his pocket and lit up. Tell me something, I said, exhaling slow. You ever see my wife with someone who wasn't me? Marty didn't answer right away, which told me plenty. He took a long drag, let the smoke curl up before sighing. Look, man, I drive a lot of people. Some faces blend together. I stared at him. He held my gaze for a few seconds before shaking his head. Yeah, I've seen her. Couple times, actually. Same guy. Older, slick, looks like he pays people to laugh at his jokes. Always heading uptown, never taking the same route twice. He flicked his cigarette, watching the sparks scatter. Didn't think it was my place to say. It wasn't, I said, though it didn't sting any less. But now it is. Marty nodded, understanding. We weren't friends in the traditional sense, but we'd pulled each other out of enough bad nights to know the rules. Anything else? I asked. He thought for a moment, then shrugged. She always sits in the back, never up front. And she never looks at her phone when she's with him. Not once. That part stuck. Cassandra was glued to her phone at home, scrolling through old photos, getting lost in nostalgia. If she wasn't looking at it when she was with him, it meant he had all of her attention. Marty exhaled through his nose. You gonna take a swing at him? No, I said, flicking the cigarette into the gutter. I'm gonna make sure he wishes I had. I left him there, backlit by the glow of the diner's sign, and drove home. The house was dark when I got there. No car in the driveway. I let myself in, kicked off my shoes, and walked straight to the bedroom. Cassandra's side of the closet was filled with neatly arranged dresses, hung with care, like she thought the right outfit could fix everything. I reached into my pocket, pulled out a pen and a scrap of paper, and wrote. I had a wonderful time last night. Thinking about you. M. I folded it in half and slid it into the pocket of her coat. Not enough to make her panic. Just enough to make her wonder. Then I went to the bathroom, turned on the shower, and let the water drown out the sound of my own thoughts. Cassandra didn't mention anything the next morning, but I saw it in the way she moved. A little distracted, fingers lingering in the pocket of her coat before pulling away like she wasn't sure what she'd just touched. She grabbed her keys from the counter, her smile a little too tight, her see you later a little too rushed. She was rattled. Good. I waited exactly 5 minutes after she left before calling Father Brennan. He picked up on the second ring, his voice low and rough like he hadn't slept much. Felix, he said, already wary. What's got you calling at this hour? Need a drink, I said, even though it was barely past 8. There was a pause, then a sigh. Coffee first. St. Luke's basement. Half an hour. I got there in 20. The church was one of those old stone buildings with a cracked wooden door and a sign that hadn't been updated in decades. Inside, the basement smelled like burnt coffee and old books, the kind of place that saw more confessions than actual sermons. Brennan sat at a folding table, a chipped ceramic mug in front of him, flipping through a weathered Bible with more notes in the margins than actual scripture. I dropped into the chair across from him. Still looking for answers in that thing? Still looking for trouble? He shot back, taking a sip of his coffee. What's on your mind? I pulled out the folded receipt, set it on the table between us. He glanced at it, didn't touch it. Cassandra, he asked. I nodded. Brennan rubbed his jaw, exhaling slow. How long? Long enough. He studied me, his eyes sharp despite the tired lines in his face. And I'm handling it. Another pause. Handling it how? I smirked. Carefully. Brennan sighed, leaning back. Felix, you know I ain't the best at preaching anymore. But I'll say this. Revenge has a way of making you lose sight of the real fight. This isn't revenge, I said. It's balance. He shook his head. She's already lost you, isn't that enough? She doesn't know she's lost me yet, I said. And that's the problem. Brennan didn't argue. He just took another slow sip of coffee and let the silence settle. That was the thing about him. He didn't push, didn't try to change your mind. He just let the weight of your own choices sit heavy on your shoulders. I stood, sliding the receipt back into my pocket. Appreciate the talk, Father. Yeah, he said, watching me go. Try not to get yourself killed. I stepped outside, let the cold air clear my head. Then I got in my car and drove to the one place that never slept, Eddie's gas station. Eddie was behind the counter, wiping his hands on an oil-stained rag, his uniform stretched tight over his stocky frame. He glanced up when I walked in, grinning. Felix, what's the emergency? You finally changing your own oil? Not today, I said, leaning on the counter. Got a question for you. Shoot. I pulled out a crumpled 20, set it on the counter. You ever see my wife around here? With company. Eddie's grin faded. He looked at the bill, then at me. You want the truth or something easier to hear? Truth. He sighed, running a hand through his short-cropped hair. Yeah, couple times. Same guy. Fancy suit, good tipper. They stop for gas, maybe some coffee. Always laughing about something. Anything else? Eddie hesitated, then leaned in slightly. Last time they came through, she looked different. Not just happy, comfortable. Like she belonged with him. That part hit harder than I expected. I nodded, pushing the 20 toward him. He shook his head. I don't need your money, Felix. Just figured you should know. I left without another word, walking back to my car. I didn't start the engine right away. Just sat there, gripping the wheel, staring at my own reflection in the rearview mirror. She was comfortable. All right, Cassandra. Let's see how comfortable you are when the tables turn. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I had a plan. Not just some heated, knee-jerk reaction, but something methodical, something that would make them feel every ounce of what they thought they were getting away with. A clean cut was too easy. People like Cassandra and Rich needed to feel the floor drop out from under them before they hit the ground. I walked inside, took my time moving through the house. Everything in its place, just like she liked it. Her perfume still lingered in the air, the faint scent of something floral and expensive. I went straight to her closet, slipped another note into the pocket of her coat. Different handwriting this time. Short, but enough. Last night was unforgettable. Can't stop thinking about you. I left it there, knowing she'd find it. Not right away, maybe, but eventually. And when she did, she'd start asking herself questions. Over the next few days, I let the pressure build. Moved things around just enough to make her second-guess herself. Her lipstick, slightly off-center on the vanity. Her favorite coffee mug switched out for another. It was subtle, nothing obvious, but enough to keep her on edge. She started looking at me differently, eyes flicking up like she was waiting for me to say something, to accuse her outright. I didn't. I just played the part, same routine, same tired smile, same everything. That's what scared her the most. One night, as we sat at the dinner table, she cleared her throat. You've been quiet lately. I glanced up from my plate, chewing slowly. Just tired. Her fingers tightened around her fork. Work. I nodded. Yeah, work. She swallowed, then gave me that same, practiced smile I'd seen 100 times before. Maybe we should take a trip. Get away for a while. I almost laughed. She wanted to run. She could feel something creeping up behind her, and instead of facing it, she wanted to outrun it. Maybe, I said, stabbing a piece of steak with my fork. Might be nice to get some fresh air. Her smile faltered. She wasn't sure if I was playing along or playing her. I let that sit. The next move wasn't just about her. Rich needed to feel it too. And for that, I needed someone who knew exactly where to twist the knife. Marty was parked in his usual spot when I slid into the passenger seat. He barely looked at me, just flicked his lighter, lighting another cigarette. Let me guess, he said, exhaling smoke. Time to make someone's life hell? Time to make sure he remembers it. Marty nodded. All right. What's the job? Rich Stanton, I said. Find out everything. Where he works, who he works with, where he plays, who he trusts. Marty let out a low whistle. Going after the big fish, huh? He thinks he's untouchable. Marty smirked. That's my favorite kind. I handed him an envelope, thick with cash. I want the kind of information that makes a man sweat. Marty took it, stuffing it in his jacket. Give me a couple days. I opened the door to leave, but his voice stopped me. You sure about this, Felix? I looked back. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. 2 days later, Marty came through. I met him at a dive bar off 38th, the kind of place where the jukebox only played sad country songs and nobody asked questions. He slid a folder across the table. You're gonna like this. I opened it, scanning the pages. Rich had a wife. That wasn't news. What was news was that his wife came from old money. The kind of money that didn't tolerate scandal. He also had a reputation, one that had been cleaned up over the years. A few discreet payoffs, a couple of buried lawsuits. Women who didn't want to come forward but had plenty to say if someone gave them the right nudge. Then there was his business. Investments, political donations, favors owed and collected. Everything about him was built on a foundation of looking good, being admired, maintaining power. A scandal wouldn't just hurt him. It would dismantle him. Marty grinned. He's got skeletons stacked to the ceiling. You just gotta decide which one to pull out first. I closed the folder, taking my time finishing my drink. All of them. Marty let out a low chuckle. You're a real son of a bitch, you know that? Yeah, I said, setting my glass down. I know. I spent the next few days pulling the strings tight. This wasn't about some big dramatic explosion. No shouting matches, no fist thrown. That wasn't my style. This was about control, making sure every piece landed exactly where I wanted it. Rich had spent his life building a reputation, polishing his image until it shined. I was going to make sure it shattered in his own hands. The first crack came through his wife. A neat little package arrived at her country club, hand-delivered. Inside were copies of the hotel receipts, photos of him and Cassandra getting cozy, and a brief, polite note. You deserve to know. No signature. No return address. Just enough to plant the seed. Rich's world ran on perception. He needed to be seen as a devoted husband, a respected businessman, the kind of man people trusted with their money and secrets. The second people started whispering, the foundation cracked. His wife wasn't the type to cry in a corner. She had the kind of money that came with connections, and she wasn't about to be made a fool of. Next, I hit his business. Marty had dug up a few old financial missteps, some donations that went places they shouldn't have, some investors who'd probably be real interested in knowing where their money had actually ended up. I made sure a few key documents found their way to the right inboxes. A reporter Marty knew owed him a favor, and by the time Rich even realized something was wrong, there were already questions being asked. Then, the final blow. An anonymous tip to his closest business associates, a few board members, a couple of political friends. Nothing outright accusatory, just enough to make them uncomfortable, to make them start questioning his judgment. Because in his world, the moment people started seeing you as weak, the walls closed in fast. Meanwhile, Cassandra had her own problems. She found the notes I'd been planting, the little inconsistencies, the moments designed to make her doubt herself. One night, I caught her sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the latest one. She turned it over in her hands like it might disappear if she looked long enough. Finally, she spoke, voice tight. "Felix, have you ever felt like you're missing something? Like things aren't where they should be?" I sipped my coffee, leaned against the counter. "Can't say I have." Her hands curled around the note. "I keep finding these. I don't know. Maybe I'm just tired." I let a beat pass, let her sit in her own uncertainty. Then I shrugged. "Yeah, maybe." She didn't look convinced, and that was the point. She was unraveling, trying to hold on to something that wasn't even real anymore. And Rich? He was about to feel the same. 2 nights later, I made sure they ran into each other at the same charity gala. A fancy ballroom, champagne glasses clinking, music playing softly over polite conversation. Cassandra arrived expecting a stolen moment with Rich. Instead, she walked straight into the fallout. His wife was there, icy and collected, talking in hushed but pointed tones with her lawyer. A few of his business partners barely acknowledged him, murmurs already spreading. The polished, confident man Cassandra had been so swept up by suddenly looked different, flushed, uncomfortable, cracking under the weight of something he couldn't control. I watched from the far end of the room, unnoticed, as Cassandra's smile wavered, as Rich avoided her eyes. It was the first time she saw him not as the man who made her feel special, but as someone who was drowning, someone who couldn't save himself, let alone her. She turned, scanning the room, and for a split second, her eyes landed on me. I held her gaze, didn't look away. Then I raised my glass in the smallest, subtlest gesture, just enough for her to know. She knew. I walked out before the night fully collapsed, stepping into the cool air, listening to the distant hum of the city. The job wasn't done yet, but the best part of any fight was knowing when your opponent had already lost. The fallout didn't take long. Rich's wife filed for divorce the next morning. The kind of divorce that wasn't quiet or civil. The kind that ripped through his money, his reputation, and his carefully built empire like a controlled detonation. The tabloids picked up the story, first whispers, then headlines. Philanthropist caught in high-profile affair. Business mogul faces legal scrutiny. Every version of his life that he had spent decades curating was turning to ash, and the best part? He had no idea where the fire had started. Cassandra, meanwhile, was unraveling in her own way. I started noticing the little things. She stayed in bed longer in the mornings, stared off into space when she thought I wasn't looking. She didn't hum while making coffee anymore, didn't linger by the window the way she used to. She still tried to keep up appearances, tried to pretend that things weren't slipping through her fingers, but it was there in the way her hands tightened around her wine glass at dinner, in the way she flinched every time her phone buzzed. Then one evening, she came home late, looking like she'd been crying. She dropped her purse on the counter and just stood there, hands braced against the marble, staring down like she was trying to hold herself together. I leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, waiting. Finally, she spoke. "He won't answer my calls." I let that hang in the air for a moment. Then, casual as ever, I said, "Who?" She let out a sharp breath, like I'd slapped her. "You know who?" I did, but I wanted to hear her say it. She turned to face me, eyes red, mouth set in a tight line. "How long have you known?" I took my time answering. "Long enough." She swallowed, glancing away, fingers curling against the counter. "I never wanted to hurt you." I actually laughed at that. A low, humorless chuckle. "Yeah? Well, congratulations, you did it anyway. Her shoulders tensed. It wasn't Felix. It wasn't what you think. I needed to feel a... Spare me, I cut in, pushing off the doorway. I don't care why you did it. I care that you did. She stared at me, waiting for something, for anger, for a fight, for some kind of emotional outburst that would make it easier to frame herself as the victim. But she wasn't going to get it. I reached into my pocket, pulled out a manila envelope, and tossed it onto the counter. She eyed it warily before opening it, her hands shaking slightly. Inside were the divorce papers. Her breath hitched. Felix. I already signed. My voice was flat, cold. You'll get your fair share. I'm not interested in dragging this out. But we're done. She blinked rapidly, nodding once, like she had prepared for this moment but still wasn't ready for how it felt. And then, quieter, did you ever love me? I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized that whatever we'd had, whatever love used to exist between us, it had died long before I ever found out about Rich. Maybe it had been dead for years, just waiting for one of us to admit it. Instead of answering, I picked up my keys and walked out the door. By the time the papers were finalized, Rich was a ghost. His business partners had cut ties, his reputation was in ruins, and his ex-wife had taken him for everything she could. Last I heard, he had skipped town, licking his wounds in some overpriced villa down south, trying to rebuild a life that wasn't coming back. Cassandra moved into a small condo across town, far from the neighborhood, far from the social circles that no longer wanted her around. She didn't reach out. I didn't either. Some things weren't worth salvaging. As for me, I was just fine. My PI business picked up. Word got around that I had a knack for handling problems, and that kind of reputation was good for business. One night, I was at a bar downtown when a woman slid onto the stool next to me. Blonde, sharp eyes, a confidence that didn't need to be announced. She ordered a whiskey neat, took a slow sip, then glanced at me. You're Felix Franklin, aren't you? I raised an eyebrow. Depends. Who's asking? She smirked. Emily Draper. I used to work with Rich Stanton. I tilted my glass in her direction. Used to. She grinned. Well, he's not exactly employable these days, is he? I chuckled. No, I suppose he's not. She studied me for a moment, then said, You ever get tired of dealing with liars and cheaters? I swirled the whiskey in my glass, considering. Nah, I said finally. Somebody's got to keep them in check. She laughed, clinking her glass against mine. To that, then. And just like that, I moved on. A year later, I was sitting in my office, boots up on the desk, nursing a coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. The place hadn't changed much. Same peeling wallpaper, same busted filing cabinet, same view of a street that never really slept. Business had been good. Word got around that I handled things quietly, efficiently, and without any sentimental bullshit. That kind of reputation stuck. I flipped through a case file, barely reading it, when the door creaked open. Marty strolled in, smelling like cigarettes and bad decisions, tossing a folded newspaper onto my desk. You made the news, he said, smirking. I unfolded it. Page 5, bottom corner. A small blurb about Rich Stanton's latest failure, some desperate real estate deal that went belly up, leaving him in even deeper debt. The man had gone from high society to barely scraping by, burning through what little he had left trying to claw his way back. I smirked. Couldn't have happened to a nicer guy. Marty chuckled, flopping down into the chair across from me. Poetic, ain't it? Man had everything, thought he was untouchable, now he's a punchline. He shook his head. Bet Cassandra's real proud. I tossed the paper aside. Haven't seen her. Don't plan to. He grunted. She's still around, you know. Different circles these days. No more charity galas and fancy luncheons. Works at some little boutique, keeps her head down. Good for her, I said, not really meaning it. Marty eyed me for a second, then shrugged. Figured you'd want to know. I don't. And I didn't. She wasn't my problem anymore. She'd made her bed, and from the sound of it, she wasn't enjoying the sheets much. That wasn't my concern. Marty leaned back, watching me. So what now? You just gonna keep playing PI till you drop dead in that chair? Maybe, I said, stretching. Beats driving a cab. He snorted. Barely. The phone rang before I could fire back. I let it ring twice before picking up. Franklin. A woman's voice came through, steady but urgent. I need your help. I grabbed a pen. What's the problem? It's my son. He's in trouble. Real trouble. I leaned forward. Where are you? She rattled off an address, and I jotted it down. Another job. Another mess to clean up. Same old story. Marty stood, clapping me on the shoulder as I hung up. Looks like your retirement plan's gonna have to wait. I grinned, grabbing my coat. Guess so. I stepped out into the street, breathing in the night air. The city stretched out ahead of me, full of liars, thieves, and bastards who thought they could get away with anything. And as long as I was around, they wouldn't.